I'm so sorry to learn of the death of Nicholas Paul Blything, who was a contestant in 2022 on Come Dine With Me. And this is a very successful reality TV show. It shouldn't be the subject of serious stress, but of course, these things can be. And the problem is, Nicholas has a history of depression and mental illness. Under the government legislation, which was put forward to try and sort out the problem with reality TV shows, he would therefore presumably be classed as a vulnerable individual and therefore should not be on this sort of show. Or maybe this sort of show has triggered the sort of problems which these shows can trigger. This lies at the heart of the issue why it is so important that the government should look again at reality TV and should reconvene the committee for the DCMS, which had got halfway through hearing testimony. It only heard testimony from production assistants and producers, and then took testimony from four people who had been, what should we call it, contestants or participants in these shows, two from Love Island and two from the Jeremy Kyle show. This isn't a fair and unbiased committee hearing. This is a committee hearing which was biased towards what the sort of conclusions that production wanted. And the result was that production now has control over people's lives for 18 months after the show finishes. This is utterly abhorrent. Production is good at making TV shows. Production is not into social care or medical care. And indeed, when I looked for support, it wasn't there. It wasn't there for 10 days. I know other people who looked for support and were extremely distressed indeed, and it was denied them. That's my experience. I've heard many, many stories which go far worse than that. And the catalogue of deaths of people who have been linked in one way or another with reality TV is astonishing, and I don't think any other industry would tolerate it. This industry, which forms the bedrock of so much broadcast television now, upwards of 60% of what we watch is reality TV. This is simply staggering that it can be so tolerated. I've reached out to agents, I've reached out to unions, I've reached out particularly to the Actors Union Equity, which is now run by a fellow called Fleming. And Fleming, young fellow, who I suspect really is a bit of a career politician. I wouldn't be surprised if we see him leading the Labour Party in a couple of years' time. But he is more interested in tinkering with the details that already exist rather than going back to the core principles of the Variety Artists Federation, which is the union which preceded Equity and which was incorporated into Equity in the 1960s. And the Artists Federation, the Variety Artists Federation, had a very interesting principle. That was that anybody who was involved in any form of entertainment had a right to representation. It didn't matter how much they were paid and how accredited they were, what sort of background they'd got. These things mattered to Equity. They didn't matter to the Variety Artists Federation. And indeed, that was the point. That was the point, because the Variety Artists Federation was about trying to set up an organization that would campaign to step in and stop exploitation by management and by producers. And collective bargaining was very much a part of its stand. And I think Equity has been misdirected. We need to make sure that people who are on reality TV have proper completely independent and completely professional support, whether that is psychological, whether that is professional, whether that is medical. That support is there, it's independent. The same psychiatric profiling that is done before one is part of one of these programs should not be part of the psychiatric support that is provided afterwards. That is inappropriate. So my huge outpourings of affection and concern for Nicholas Paul Blything's family, and for all the things that they're going through today, and the perhaps unnecessary intrusion of the media into their lives once again. But as I say, there is a core principle here that Michelle Donnellan and, for example, her predecessors, the extremely reluctant Nadine Dorries, who never opened letters, never responded to letters. I think there's a person called Lopez who does quite a lot of responding, but even her letters are inadequate. In fact, I've got one here that I've not really looked at, and it's all the same offhand nonsense where the government thinks that it can simply refer people back to the same rubbish again and again, which simply doesn't work. And go and talk to Ofcom. Well, Ofcom isn't interested. And Ofcom knows that this is beyond its remit. So who is one supposed to talk to? One is supposed to talk to the government, and the government is supposed to listen. Instead, it pontificates, because it's presumably been encouraged to accept the status quo by production. There is a way that reality TV can be incorporated into our diet of television watching. This isn't the way, and if we continue like this, the entire industry is going to be destroyed.